Blog Talk Radio.
Opening music provided by bensound.com. Welcome, everyone, to today's Earth Energy Forecast Show on this Tuesday, December 17th, 2019. Thank you for listening today, or if you're listening later to the podcast. I am your host, Joan Cerio. Today, I am honored to have on the show one of Mother Earth's greatest advocates, Dr. Helen Caldicott, the single most articulate and passionate advocate of citizen action to remedy the nuclear and environmental crises. Dr. Helen Caldicott has devoted the last 42 years to an international campaign to educate the public about the medical hazards of the nuclear age and the necessary changes in human behavior to stop environmental destruction. Dr. Caldicott received her medical degree from the University of Adelaide Medical School in South Australia in 1961. She founded the Cystic Fibrosis Clinic at the Adelaide Children's Hospital and subsequently was an instructor in pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. While living in the U.S., she was the president of Physicians for Social Responsibility. She helped start similar medical organizations in many other countries. One of these groups, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1985. She also founded the Women's Action for Nuclear Disarmament in 1980. Dr. Caldicott has received many prizes and awards for her work, including the Lannan Foundation's 2003 Prize for Cultural Freedom and 21 honorary doctoral degrees. She was personally nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Linus Pauling, himself a Nobel laureate. The Smithsonian has named her as one of the most influential women of the 20th century. She has written for numerous publications and has authored 7 books. She has also been the subject of several films, including the documentary If You Love This Planet, which won the Academy Award for Best Documentary in 1982. Dr. Caldicott is the president of the Helen Caldicott Foundation /nuclearfreeplanet.org. Her website is helencaldicott.com. Welcome to the show, Dr. Caldicott. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you very much.
So I'm so interested in how you got started with all this wonderful work. How did your work progress to the point where you worked to help remedy the nuclear environmental crises that we face today?
Okay, well, when I was about 16, I read a book by an Australian author called Neville Shute called On the Beach, and it was about a nuclear war that occurred by accident in the Northern Hemisphere, which could happen today. Everyone died, and gradually the radiation came down to the southern hemisphere, and I lived in Melbourne, which is far south in Australia, and it described how the government dispensed cyanide capsules to families so they could kill their babies immediately rather than dying of acute radiation illness, vomiting and bleeding to death. And at the end of the book, that was the end of the human race. Everyone in Melbourne died, and that marked my soul. I was never the same again. I've always been scared of nuclear war, and in fact, we're closer to nuclear war than we've ever been before, according to Mikhail Gorbachev and William Perry, former Secretary of Defense, and the like. And people don't seem to worry about it. Anyway, I then entered medical school age 17 and had a wonderful biology teacher called Peter Martin, and I learned what radiation does to genes, Muller's experiments with Drosophila fruit fly and irradiating them. And I learned that radiation mutates genes to cause genetic abnormalities and also cancer. And at the time, Russia, and it was 57, 56, Russia and America were testing bombs in the atmosphere like there's no tomorrow, and I couldn't understand what these stupid men were doing, irradiating millions of people with fallout, having learnt what I learnt at medical school. I tried to organise people at the university, but they thought I was a dumb Sheila. That's what they call women in Australia, a Sheila. And so I gave up doing that, but I always was intensely curious and read everything I could find about nuclear weapons and proliferation and the like. So that's what started me off. It's a long story. When I finished medical school, I had 3 babies in quick succession, 3 years, came to America for 3 years where I worked at Harvard in the cystic fibrosis clinic. My mother died at the end of that time in Australia, and I became profoundly depressed. And after that, I came home, and I worked in a hospital in a renal unit and pricked my finger, and 3 months to the day, I developed acute hepatitis B, and I actually nearly died. I was close to death, almost died. And when I recovered, I thought, my life doesn't belong to me anymore. I'm here to serve. And shortly after that, and I read Germaine Greer, A Female Eunuch, so I suddenly thought, my God, can I say those things, be myself? And that changed my life radically. And then someone leaked to me a document about high radiation levels in the Adelaide water supply because the French were testing bombs in the air in the Pacific, violating international laws. And so I wrote a letter to the paper about this, how children can get leukemia by drinking radioactive milk and the like. They didn't publish the letter, so I called the editor and I said, hey, where's my letter? And he then published it. And then I was that night asked to be on television. And over 9 months, I was often on television as the French tested more bombs. What I didn't realise was that the Australians don't like the French. They think they're arrogant. And the Australians were really, really cross. People stopped buying French wine, French cheese. They wouldn't deliver French mail. I mean, it was and we had huge marches in city streets. And at the end of 9 months, 75% of Australians said, we won't have those bloody French blowing up their bloody bombs in the Southern Hemisphere. And our Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, and the New Zealand Prime Minister took France to the International Court of Justice, and they were forced to test underground, which was, we didn't get fallout, but they were still testing their bombs and polluting those wonderful islands in the Pacific. So I saw what President Jefferson said, an informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion. And it was really quite an outstanding, and at the time I led that movement, actually, I was working as an intern at the Adelaide Children's Hospital because I hadn't got a degree from the Royal Australian College of Physicians to be a physician, so that I could be an operating paediatrician and set up a clinic for CF patients in Adelaide because they were all dying at about age of 4. The attitude at that time was they've got a fatal genetic disease, and the sooner they die, the better. So they said, you can't have any clinic because you're not qualified. So I thought, well, I said to my husband, you've studied and become a pediatric radiologist at Harvard. Now it's my turn. You can mind the kids, and I'll do work 80 hours a week. So during the time of the French test protests, the hospital switchboard got more calls about French tests than they did about patients. And I was called to the administrator's office, and I said, well, are my patients suffering? And he said, no. So after I got my degree, member of the Royal Australasian College of Physicians, I then set up the CF clinic in Adelaide, which was the first in Australia, and it has the best longevity results now of any clinic in Australia. So that was good. Shall I go on, or will I stop?
Well, I think you should go on because this is quite interesting, and then I'll ask you some other questions. So,
all right,
yes,
okay.
please go on. How you really got started? Yes.
Then after that victory and setting up a CF clinic, I found out that our then Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, who was really a wonderful Prime Minister, wanted to mine and sell uranium. And I knew nothing about nuclear power at all. So I went to the Adelaide University Bar Smith Library, and I got out a book called Poison Power by Goffman and Tamplin. Now, they worked for the Atomic Energy Commission. Goffman was a physician, and he helped to discover plutonium, actually. And they were commissioned by the Atomic Energy Commission to write a book about nuclear power and its medical dangers. And when I read that book, my hair nearly fell out on the desk. I'd never read anything so extraordinarily dangerous in my whole medical career. I wrote a letter to the paper. They weren't interested. I went to see the Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam. He wasn't interested either. But I had a friend who was an engine driver, and he said, look, let's write to all the unions in Australia and ask if you can come and talk to them. At the time, there were 76 unions in South Australia, the Boilermakers Union, the Pastry Cooks Union, everyone. And I wrote to them, and they said, yes, you can come and talk to us, but we need the jobs. So I would go all over Australia, get up at 6 and go and speak to the men who are going out in Darwin to do various jobs, and I'd talk to them as they ate their breakfast and drank their tea and coffee. And I had a dirty old blackboard, and it was the floor was a dirt floor, but I drew genes, I drew testicles, I drew sperm. I explained how radiation can damage genes to produce genetic abnormalities in their offspring or cause them to develop cancer or inhale radon gas while they're mining uranium. And I got around to speak to unions all over Australia. And finally I ended up at the Adelaide big union meeting, the Trade and Labour Council, and they said, you've got 10 minutes to talk. And they'd all had a fair bit of beer to drink before I started, because that's what Australian men do. And, and I started talking, and they were talking during my speech. And I thought, what am I going to do to shut them up? So after 5 minutes of this, I started talking about radiation effect upon their testicles, and that shut them up.
Yeah, I bet it would.
Oh, it works. Yep, always works for the men. I had 5 minutes to finish, and at the end they'd say, we don't want our kids growing up in a world like that. And they'd send a message to the Prime Minister. So shortly after that, I actually left for America for a sabbatical. But after I left, the whole Australian Trades and Labour Council, all the unions in Australia, all the workers, voted to ban uranium mining, to ban transport, and to ban export of uranium. And there was another victory by educating people. They respond in a responsible fashion. But that ban only lasted 3 years. We got a Prime Minister called Bob Hawke. He was a larrikin. A larrikin means a guy who sleeps with lots of women, drinks a lot of beer, but he was a fairly good Prime Minister, except that he closed down the ban or aborted it and opened it up to say, well, we'll have a free mine policy, just 3 mines, which is like saying to a patient, well, don't worry, you're just a little bit pregnant. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And that was a dreadful thing that happened. Then when I moved to America, because I knew now a lot about nuclear power, I was asked to speak at various places, and then someone asked me to write a book. And I said, I don't want to write a book. I've never written a book. And they said, well, you can tape it, speak into a recorder and tape it. Well, I tried that, but it didn't work. So I ended up writing a book called Nuclear Madness, outlining all the medical implications of nuclear power. I also was asked by Arnold Grellman, the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, to write an article about medical dangers of nuclear power. So I spent a year in the Countway Library in Harvard writing the article and researching the literature. And it was a good article, but when it went to peer review, the doctor said, well, you didn't say anything good about nuclear power, and it was rejected. And I said, well, there isn't anything medically good about nuclear power. Unfortunately, I got a bit depressed after that, and I lost the article, which was a pity. But anyway, I learnt an awful lot. So I became one of the world's experts on the medical effects of nuclear power. I wrote that book, and it did very well. At the same time, I was working at Harvard, and a young doctor came to see me because there was a referendum in Cambridge against all things nuclear. Well, at MIT, there's a nuclear reactor, and Harvard, of course, handles a lot of nuclear stuff. And he came and said, I wanted, some information. So we talked about it, and I told him what to read, and I said, look, Ira, this is a medical problem. Let's start a medical organisation. And so there happened to be a medical organisation called Physicians for Social Responsibility, which was operating in the early 60s about fallout and strontium-90 getting into children's teeth and describing the medical effects of a bomb dropping on Boston, New England Journal of Medicine. And so that organisation had died. It was dead. But it was still registered in the state of Massachusetts. So we decided that we'd call it by that name, but this was a totally different organisation. So we started, and I put together an ad for the New England Journal of Medicine on the medical dangers of nuclear power, and it happened to be published the day after 3 Mile Island happened. Well, we were besieged by doctors, and we were operating out of a little broom cupboard in a cactus in Harvard Square, and then we had to move because we had so many, and so that started the whole movement of Physicians for Social Responsibility. And I then got around to all over the country doing what we call grand rounds, talking to doctors in their weekly medical meeting, where they might hear about a neurological problem or renal problems, and I would present the medical dangers of nuclear power. And in that way, over 5 years, we recruited, we had 153 chapters and 23,000 doctors. And
that's amazing. Wow.
They were writing op-ed pieces, they were appearing on television, on radio. And meanwhile, we organized a series of symposia on the medical effects of nuclear war, and they became profoundly popular at Harvard and Stanford and Chicago, all over. And we were given quite a lot of money by the Rockefellers and others. And what happened was at one of the symposia, I was the final speaker, and I said, why immunize our children when they don't have a future? And a person came up and said, look, I'm an agent in Hollywood. I'd like to work with you. And I said, I don't have any money. And she said, well, I'll work for you for free. So she got me on Merv Griffin, on Phil Donahue, on the Today Show, on, in Vogue, Lifetime. And so gradually, well, it took a couple of years, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Sixpack sitting back watching their television on 60 Minutes, they learned about the medical dangers of nuclear war. And so by the end of a few years, almost everyone in America was frightened about nuclear war. And then from that came a film called The Day After about a bomb dropping on a Midwestern town, and everybody in America watched it. Psychologists were employed to counsel people after the film.
Yes.
It was so deadly. Reagan saw it, and after that, well, I'd already met with Reagan in the Oval Office. I mean, not in the White House for an hour and a quarter, explaining to him about the medical effects of nuclear war. He was quite uptight. For half the time, I had to hold his hand to reassure him because he really didn't know anything. I'd just written a book called Missile Envy, so I knew everything about the whole nuclear arms race. I came out saying I think he has impending Alzheimer's, and that diagnosis was accurate. But anyway, after I saw him, and after he saw that film, he said nuclear war must never be fought and can never be won. And he and Gorbachev had seen our doctors too on television in Moscow. And so they got together and they met at Reykjavik. and they almost agreed, two mere mortals, men, to abolish nuclear weapons. They almost agreed. But Reagan was stuck in his childlike simplicity on Star Wars. He sort of thought there would be a big shield over America, and the Russian missiles would come in and go boink, boink, and bounce off the shield.
Oh.
It would never work. Gorbachev knew it would never work, but Gorbachev would not agree with... Reagan said, well, we'll abolish nuclear weapons, but I want Star Wars. And so the talks founded on that point, but they did produce quite a good arms control agreement. So the opportunity to save the planet from nuclear annihilation was lost. Anyway, when that happened and the Berlin Wall came down subsequently, we were so tired, we just lay on our couches and said, well, that's it, we've done it.
Mm-hmm.
And the media started talking about peace dividends and the money that goes to the Pentagon, an obscene amount of money every year, $1 trillion, will be now reallocated to infrastructure and medical care and the like. Well, that didn't happen because the military-industrial corporations, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, BAE, et cetera, they need war. So although Reagan had agreed with Gorbachev after the Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall came down that the little European countries, Lithuania, Latvia, etc., would not become part of NATO. That the head of Lockheed Martin, Norman Augustine, didn't like that. So he set off on a conquest to convince all these little countries that they need to be, quotes, democracies, and they need to join NATO. And to join NATO, they had to spend about $3 billion on weapons. And he got around to all those countries. So what happened was, although America had promised Gorbachev that those countries would stay free, they all joined NATO, and NATO is America. And they all got armed, and now America's putting missile systems right up on the border of Russia and being extremely provocative. And if you imagine Russia coming to Canada and, lining missiles up on the border of Canada, what would America do? She'd probably blow up the world like she nearly did with the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we missed the opportunity. And those wicked, wicked, wicked corporations now are spending, over $1 trillion a year. In fact, since let me see if I got it here. Since 9/11, I had a piece of paper on it. America's killed 500,000 people, I think, and spent about $1 trillion on war and killing.
Yeah, I believe it.
No, I don't.
Sad.
Don't have it here. So, I've just written an article which I sent to the New York Times, and they wouldn't publish it, so I've had to publish it in a little sort of online journal in Australia, but it's going around online and being posted everywhere. I said that America has no enemies. Russia was communist, but now she's one of the leading capitalist countries in the world. Russia hasn't invaded any country, despite what they say about the Ukraine and the Crimea. She hasn't, and I won't go into that. America's invaded, I don't know how many countries in Central and South America and all over the world, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, etc. And Russia, we need Russia to be a friend because Russia's got 12 hydrogen bombs targeted on New York. 12. 2 on each airport, 2 on each bridge, 1 on each tunnel, and the like. I mean, you can't imagine the targeting. And these are hydrogen bombs, by orders of magnitude larger than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. Like, one bomb would just evaporate New York and everyone in it. Every town in America with a population of 50,000 or more is targeted with at least one Russian bomb. So the people we really need to befriend are the Russians, because the only real terrorists in the world are Russia and America. between them, they've got, 10,000 hydrogen bombs targeted at each other and Europe and the like. And nuclear war would take about 1 hour to complete. 1 hour. There's an idiot as president in America, and he's the one who can press the button. There's a soldier carrying the codes around to start a nuclear war with him the whole time. He's not very stable emotionally. And so we're in grave, grave danger. So America has no enemies, and it's very important that they make friends with Russia. And that's the only thing that Trump is doing well, is he's making friends with Putin. What's wrong with that? There's nothing. And Russia really didn't interfere in your election. And yet, let's be frank, America's interfered in almost every election since the Second World War, all around the world. America's so hypocritical and superior in its attitude to itself, towards itself. Anyway, so I said that America's got no enemy. And what America needs to do is to befriend nations all around the world. The Pentagon is the Department of War and Killing. It's not the Department of Defense. You don't have to defend yourself because there are no enemies. And the Pentagon should be closed down, shut. And the $1 trillion a year, which Congress has just voted $784 billion, but it's really up to $1 trillion for the Pentagon just now. Huge amount of money, and it all goes into the coffers of Lockheed Martin, Boeing, etc. So the Pentagon should be shut down. That money reallocated to saving the planet, putting solar panels on every single house, putting windmills everywhere, offshore windmills, housing the homeless, free medical care, free education, fixing the infrastructure. I mean, the solutions to save the planet are here right now.
Right now.
And the money spent on killing and death has to be transferred to life.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree.
Here ends my monologue.
Well, I agree with you, Dr. Caldicott. We do have the resources, and we've had free energy, and I've had people on the show talk about free energy and have been using it and what Tesla had found. And, it's been the big oil companies, again, the corporations, that have kept it squashed.
Yes, because the world government spends billions and billions of dollars subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. That should be closed down now. And I write about that in my article. In fact, if I find my article, I can just read to you quickly, because I thought it was quite lyrical, although I say it myself and shouldn't, as my mother would say. Let's see. Here it is. Okay. I'll just write. I might read you the whole article because it's actually everything that I think at the moment. I write this piece as a physician, expertly trained to make accurate diagnoses to either cure the patient or to alleviate their symptoms. I therefore approach the viability of life on Earth from a similar and honest perspective. Hence, for some, this may be an extremely provocative article, but as the planet is in the intensive care unit, we have no time to waste, and the startling truth must be accepted. As T.S. Eliot wrote so long ago, this is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. Will we gradually burn and shrivel the wondrous creation of evolution by emitting the ancient carbon stored over billions of years to drive our cars and power our industries? Or will we end it suddenly with our monstrous weapons within which we have captured the energy powering the sun? Here's a stark diagnosis from a U.S. perspective. The Department of Defense has nothing to do with defense because it is, in effect, the Department of War. Over $1 trillion of U.S. taxpayers' money is stolen annually to create and build the most hideous weapons of death and destruction, even to launch killing machines from space. And since 9/11, $6 trillion have been allocated to the slaughter of over 500,000 people, almost all of whom were civilians, men, women, and children. brilliant people, mostly men, are employed by the massive military-industrial corporations, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, BAE, United Technologies, to name a few, deploying their brain power to devise better and more hideous ways of killing. From an unbiased perspective, the only true terrorists today are Russia and the United States of America, both of which have several thousand hydrogen bombs, larger by orders of magnitude than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, on hair-trigger alert, ready to be launched with a press of a button in the US by the President. This so-called nuclear exchange would take little over 1 hour to complete. As in Japan, people would be seared to bundles of smoking char as their internal organs boiled away, and over time the global environment would be plunged into another ice age called nuclear winter, annihilating almost all living organisms, including ourselves. But the stark truth is that the United States of America has no enemies. Russia, once a sworn communist power, is now a major capitalist country, and the so-called war on terror is just an excuse to keep this massive killing enterprise alive and well. Donald Trump is right when he says we need to make friends with the Russians because it's the Russian bombs that could and might annihilate America. Indeed, we need to foster friendship with all nations throughout the planet and reinvest the billions and trillions of dollars spent on war, killing and death to saving the ecosphere by powering the world with renewable energy, including solar, wind and geothermal, and planting trillions of trees. Such a move would also free up billions of dollars to be reallocated to life, such as free medical care for all US citizens, free education for all, to house the homeless, to hospitalize the mentally sick, to register all citizens to vote, and to invest in the abolition of nuclear weapons. The United States of America urgently needs to rise to its full moral and spiritual height and lead the world to sanity and survival. I know this is possible because in the 1980s, millions of wonderful people rose up nationally and internationally to end the nuclear arms race and to end the Cold War. This, then, is a sound template upon which we must act.
Wonderful article. Where did you have that published, Dr. Caldicott?
That was in the Independent in Australia. It's an online journal, the Independent. But it's also now on my webpage, and it's also been posted on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. I think it's a good article too. I think it's the best article I've ever written.
Well, it certainly needs to get out there, and I agree with you that education, education does make a difference in forming people. Information is power.
Well, it makes all the difference. Yeah. Yep.
So, why do you think we're closer now to nuclear war than we've ever been?
Because of ignorance.
Specifically, American ignorance.
We've got a mentally unstable person with the button at his disposal. Also, because there's proliferation of nuclear weapons now. India and Pakistan are quite volatile, especially over the Kashmir border. They're both armed with nuclear weapons, and a small nuclear war could start there, which would then almost certainly bring in the major superpowers and their military plans for nuclear war. Then there's China. Well, she's only got about 200 nuclear weapons. France, of course, has nuclear weapons, but she won't start a war. England has nuclear weapons. I think they got theirs to replace their lost empire. Who else has nuclear weapons? I can't think, but it's really the proliferation and the hot spots around the world. And why on earth people keep fighting? And many of the wars are about religion. And let's face it, there is no God. I mean, I'm a physician, I'm a scientist. There isn't a God, but they fight about these things which are so irrelevant. What we need to do is save the glorious creation. When you think that there are 35 million galaxy, million or billion. And
probably more like billion.
We're part of only one galaxy, and they think there may be another universe. I mean, how incredibly fortunate we are to have inherited this glorious planet with the life that we behold. And we're so stupid now. I think we're evolutionary aberrants. Our brain is too big for our moral sense. And it's mostly men who've done this, which really pisses me off. I thought time women took over the world. There are some bad ones, but the magic number of women in an enterprise is 30%, below which they vote to please the men. Above 30% representation of women in a corporation, in academia, wherever, they say we're not voting for missiles today, we're voting for milk for children. And it's across the board because our bodies were built to nurture life. Our hormones are made to nurture life. Men's hormones, I think, are made to kill the territorial imperative and the like. And it's time we took over. They've really screwed it up.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I'm sure, I'm imagining, let's put it that way, that it was more difficult for you to get all this information out being a woman.
No, it wasn't really. Well, at that time I was young and quite attractive. I had this accent which Americans think is British, and they sort of admire the British, but I'm Australian. I was smart, and I was able to express myself eloquently, I suppose, and I was a doctor. But it's interesting because people say, what can I do? I came to America in 1978 and started leading this movement. I was an alien. I was a woman. I was a doctor, yes. But sort of like Joan of Arc, I led, with the help of so many other people, this incredible revolution. It was the second American Revolution. And so nothing can stop you if you decide to save the planet. Nothing.
So where are we today in the doomsday clock?
We're heading towards annihilation. Global warming is upon us. Australia is going to have the hottest week it's ever had in its history. 50 degrees centigrade. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. We've got huge forest fires burning, and forests are just exploding with flames lifting 50 feet into the air, just exploding. There's a drought which is very severe. The rivers are drying up. The fish are dying in the rivers. And our stupid Prime Minister, he's an evangelical Christian. He says, pray for rain. And he's for digging up coal. We've got a huge amount of coal. We are one of the biggest emitters of CO2 per capita in the world in Australia. And that's not counting the coal that we export to China and India and everywhere else, which all adds to global warming. We did not do well at the recent climate conference. We did very badly. And that's sort of typical of many countries in the world because the politicians are corporate prostitutes. They are owned and funded by the corporations. However, we are not using our democracies. The truth is that our politicians are our representatives and we are their leaders. And what we need to do is get off our bottoms, leave our computers, go and see our politician every week when he or she comes home to the district, and teach them about the medical effects of nuclear war, how close it is. Well, first you have to teach yourself, and about global warming, and make them read books and say, if you don't do thus, thus, and thus, I'm going to make sure you're not re-elected next time. Then you can get out and door knock all over your electorate and change the policies through changing your representatives. You can even run for Congress yourself. And get rid of these lusted corporations who dominate Congress.
Yes.
Dominate Congress. And this Mitch McConnell is one of the most evil guys in the world. He's alongside with Rupert Murdoch, who's a fellow countryman of mine.
Interesting. Well, we were seeing a lot of people now becoming more active in various countries, Venezuela, Brazil, Italy. So people are finally, people are finally finding their voice, and I think that's really what needs to happen.
It's good, but what needs to happen is these gorgeous young children led by Greta Thunberg, they need not just to be marching outside, they need to take over Parliament. Millions of kids need to walk into our Parliament House in Canberra in Australia and take it over. Millions of kids need to walk into Congress and the Senate and take it over. I had an idea years ago. I said that, and it was called Babies Against the Pentagon, BAP, that hundreds of mothers with young, toddlers could enter the Senate chamber while they're debating nuclear weapons or something, and they could probably get in because they wouldn't be a threat. They'd go through the security machines and then release hundreds of naked toddlers onto the Senate floor as an expression of what we're trying to save, how precious they are. And the senators can clean up the mess that they would make.
Yes, if only we would rule like a lot of the indigenous tribes.
No, but everyone, that's the thing that could actually happen. People could do that. Do you see? It's possible.
It is. It is possible. Yes, but and a lot of the indigenous tribes ruled, and they made their decisions based on 7 generations to come, because they wanted to ensure that.
we've got to.
We
do
don't
that
see
now.
it. We don't do that. No, we don't do that.
But as Martin Luther King said, if you don't have an issue worth dying for, you're not really living. And I was prepared to die for this. I had 8 death threats. I think the CIA removed me as president of Physicians for Social Responsibility. I mean, I think you have to be at that level and not give a damn, because what's your life compared to the creation? I mean, we've got to get it in perspective.
Yes.
And be brave and get out there and just use your creativity.
So where are we with the Fukushima catastrophe? Do you know anything about how the ocean has been polluted?
Certainly I know about it, and I've written a book about it called Crisis Without End. It's a catastrophe which will never, ever be resolved. So Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, in his wickedness, has decided to have the 2020 Olympics at Fukushima. That's where the race starts, and they're going to have football games there and baseball games, and the ground's really very radioactive. So these beautiful young bodies who've trained themselves to glory are going to be exposed by inhaling radioactive elements in the dust, by being exposed to gamma radiation, which is being given off from the ground, like X-rays from the various isotopes, strontium, cesium, and the like. Then they'll probably eat radioactive food. Much of the food in Fukushima Prefecture, which is a wonderful area for growing peaches and rice and everything, is now radioactive. The 3 reactors were melted down. They will never be able to get the melted radioactive fuel, which is melted into the ground. They'll never be able to recover it. It's so radioactive, no one can go near it. When they send computers down to try and find out what's happening, they just melt. Robots melt.
Wow.
if there's another earthquake greater than 7 on the Richter scale, one or several of the buildings could collapse onto the molten fuel and release huge amounts of radiation, much more than was ever released initially, which could pollute people throughout the northern hemisphere. The two hemispheric air masses don't mix at the equator, so it would only be the northern hemisphere. If that happened, I'm going to fly my family out from Boston to Australia immediately. Water pours down from the mountains underneath the reactors. When they were intact, it was fine, but now it mixes with the deadly radioactive molten core and pours into the ocean at, I can't remember, 300 tons of radioactive water a day pour into the Pacific, and that's been happening since the accident in 2011. And those radioactive elements, strontium, cesium, and the like, bioconcentrate by orders of magnitude at each step of the food chain: algae, crustaceans, little fish, big fish, us. And so the fish swim thousands of miles carrying the radioactive elements. Radioactive tuna has been caught in California, etc., and fish swim all over the place. And as well, they're pouring huge amounts of water into the molten cores to make sure they don't remelt. And that water is very radioactive, and it's stored in thousands of huge tanks, which are only built to last 6 or 5 years, right next to the Pacific Ocean. So if there's another earthquake, those tanks will all collapse, and this huge amount of water, 1 million tons, I think, of highly radioactive water will pour into the Pacific. They say they've removed the strontium and the cesium and the 100 or so other elements, and it's only got tritium in it, which is also extremely carcinogenic. But in fact, they didn't remove all the other elements, and that's a disaster waiting to happen. In fact, they're running out of space, their tanks, and they are now postulating that they will release this radioactive water into the Pacific. What else can I tell you about it? I mean, it's just an absolute disaster which will never be alleviated.
Yeah,
ever.
and it's only a matter of time. Yeah, no, they don't. No, they don't want people to know. That's the crime of it.
Yep.
And it's only a matter of time.
Called Crisis Without End, and it comes from a symposium I held at the New York Academy of Medicine some years ago, and I got the best physicists and physicians and nuclear engineers from around the world who gave presentations. And if you go to my webpage, you'll find that book, Crisis Without End, about Fukushima.
Yes. And it's only a matter of time before there's another earthquake there.
Yes, of course.
Because there's more and more severe earthquakes and volcanic activity and stuff that's happening now. So it's not a very good picture, is it?
You know what? I think we've covered the waterfront, Joan. Is there any outstanding issue that we haven't addressed? I mean, we've addressed most of them.
I think we have. So what can we do? Is there anything that we can do, Dr. Caldicott?
Well,
other than what you said?
I've been telling you the whole time what you can do. you turn into Joan of Arc and John of Arc and get on your steed and change America. I mean, you live in a democracy. I did it. If I did it, you can. I get cross with people and say, well, what can I do? And you feel so much better when you. But you have to. What you must do is 3 things. First, educate yourself. You need to go to my webpage, helencaldicott.com, and read all the books there. If you love this planet, nuclear madness, missile envy, crisis without end, sleepwalking to Armageddon. I'm looking at them now. Nuclear power is not the answer. The new nuclear danger. and you can read my autobiography, A Desperate Passion, educate yourselves, really imbibe that information so that you can win any debate against stupid McConnell or any of them, beat them. Then you'll go through a process of grief, which Kubler-Ross described. The first will be shock and disbelief, how bad it is. The second will be depression. Allow yourself to be depressed. Don't, turn on the music or have a glass of wine to make yourself feel better. Well, you can sometimes. But get my point. You have to really go through this. And then one day you'll wake up and you'll know what you want to do. Anger. Anger is appropriate. Anger is a very profoundly important emotion. People say you mustn't be angry. We have to be terribly angry. It's like the Germans watching the Jews going off to the gas ovens, You've got to be angry and stop this wickedness. And the brain gets really active. I mean, if you're chased by a bull, you can actually jump a fence 6 feet high because you pump out adrenaline, pushes up the blood sugar level, etc. So, and you will wake up and you don't know what you'll be inspired to do. And I'll end with one last anecdote. There was a woman called Joan Cerio who heard me give a speech in a Southern Baptist church years ago about the threat of nuclear war. And she became so depressed, she could hardly get out of bed for a year. She could hardly cut a loaf of bread. She was so depressed. One day she woke up and a light turned on in her head and she knew what she was going to do. So she went along, put on her best shoes and her pearls and went to the Heritage Foundation, which is a right-wing think tank, which is for nuclear war, funded by Ocean Spray Cranberries, Hertz Rent-A-Car Holiday Inns and the like. And she got a job there. And she worked there and got paid. And at night when they all went home, she went through all their files and read everything that they were up to. After a year, she thanked them very much. She left and she travelled across America like Joan of Arc and went to every synagogue and church and told them what the Heritage Foundation had planned. Now, she did that. She didn't even know she was going to do it. And I can tell you myriad stories like that.
I hope this inspires so many people to do what you just said, Dr. Caldicott. To follow those three steps and follow your heart.
Yeah, got to follow your heart and your soul.
Yes.
Rise to your full moral and spiritual height. Hold the world like Atlas on your shoulders.
Yes. And love her because she's our mother. She's our planet.
Well, you only do it because you love her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll end with this one last admonition. Just think how lucky we are that your sperm, out of the millions of sperm ejaculated by your father that night, each different, your sperm reached your egg. What a privilege. What an incredible act of luck. And we're here to save the planet.
Yes, we are. And thank you so much for all that you've done, for devoting most of your life to doing this. It has been an act of love and service.
It's been my pleasure. It's been an act of love, Yes, my pleasure.
And may all of us, find the love in our hearts to love our Mother Earth and to save her.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Joan,
for being on the show
today.
Okay,
bye-bye.
And thank you, everyone, for listening today. There won't be a show next Tuesday on Christmas Eve, but I'll be back on the following Tuesday, New Year's Eve, with Jude Valentine, our resident astrologer, when she'll tell us about the astrology for 2020. It will be a great show. A blessed solstice and happy holidays to all. And may we all find it in our hearts to love this Mother Earth. Much love to you.